Good. Jace, look at this place. Unbelievable. Paradise.
I've been a fan of the Far Cry series for as long as I can remember. The first time I played any Far Cry game was exactly 10 years ago when I was first introduced to the Rook Islands in Far Cry 3. This adventure shaped many of my philosophies on life and my taste in gaming as a whole. It was an extremely smart and intelligent deep dive into what makes a villain and how our protagonist slowly indulges in villainous traits, until the role of the antagonist is blurred in the story. Besides the fantastically written story, the game was just extremely iconic and memorable, from its trademark villains, revolutionary gameplay, and a perfect formula for an engaging open world that simply never gets old. What made this game so iconic and memorable for so many was the innovation we saw in this title. Far Cry as a series up to this point was diverse, with the previous game having several mechanics that prioritized immersion and realism over fun, or was just kinda bad. However, in Far Cry 3, they perfected and innovated on every idea that was introduced in the previous games to create a formula that would define a legacy for Far Cry. Unfortunately for Ubisoft and fans alike, this formula would ultimately be the thing that would destroy this series, and reveal what it had always been destined to be.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
On the 18th of November 2014, fans were excited to experience the sequel to a masterpiece, and it didn't disappoint. Far Cry 4 is one of my personal favourites in the entire series because this was the first time they really got creative with the location, with the map taking place in the Asian region of Kyrat. Ubisoft really went crazy in the marketing for this game because they wanted to reassure fans they were going to get exactly what they wanted. A new villain that continues the legacy of big bads who are fun and intriguing. The same addictive gameplay loop which made navigating and exploring the Rook Islands so fun, and several more ways to traverse the map with the new gyrocopter and grappling hook, alongside some awesome new features such as co-op and creative side missions. To this day, I still believe Far Cry 4 is a damn near perfect video game, with the only big disappointment being the story and maybe to an extent some of the main characters. But then again, you can fuck around with the Yetis and the DLC, so it's a worthy trade-off if you ask me. However, at the end of Far Cry 4, or more specifically Far Cry Primal, fans were looking for a change. After experiencing what is essentially the same game for 3 times in a row, fans demanded Ubisoft change their ways and resort back to the roots that gave us the excellent Far Cry 3. Mechanics such as climbing towers were beginning to show their age. Clearing outposts and unlocking the same skill trees over and over again were proving to be mundane and repetitive. Sure, we had some great ideas like Far Cry Primal's taming mechanic or Far Cry 4's outrageous drug missions. Seriously, these are my favourites. But it was time for something truly ambitious. Something that would throw the series back to its roots and deliver the exact same magic that made Far Cry 3 so iconic. And on the 27th of March 2018, we got just that.
Some will wish to harm us. Some will wish to destroy all that we have built here together. Some will betray us.
Far Cry 5 was the game that briefly restored everyone's faith in this series. Everyone's worries of repetition and insanity were spared. The world rejoiced in a symphony of optimism and positivity for this game, and I remember it like it was fucking yesterday. Critics everywhere praised 5's approach to exploration and progression. Fans were excited as ever to see 4 equally compelling antagonists who can explore mature themes like we saw with Vars in 3. And for once in a beautifully peaceful period of my life, it felt like all of my worries and fears of Ubisoft becoming another sellout developer were briefly put to rest. Shame it didn't last long, but it was nice while it lasted. Now, I could talk about Far Cry 5 till the cows come home. It's seriously one of my favourite fucking games of all time, and if you are genuinely curious to see my full in-depth thoughts on this game, I'll leave a link up above if you're interested. With the end of Far Cry 5 came a positive and exciting prospect for the series. The ending was ambiguous, with a cliffhanger that left many fans desperate for what Ubisoft was cooking in this radiated wasteland. Little did we know, it was absolute shit. Far Cry New Dawn to this day is my least favourite game in this series, and one of the most embarrassing games I've ever played. If you're a fan of the channel, you know I like to keep things fun and positive here. I don't like talking about things I hate. However, we are making a giant fucking exception for New Dawn because I really don't like this game. The direction for this sequel had a lot of potential, because they wanted to continue the story of 5 by exploring the characters and the world of Hope County even more. Trailers would show us Joseph Seed's return alongside a flurry of Easter eggs and references from 5 that got me so ridiculously excited for this. And on the 15th of February 2019, I was introduced to this game, and my dumbass loved it. The world was bright and colourful, the gameplay had the same addictive elements that made 5 so fun, and the story was filled with plenty of fun and memorable moments. 5 years later, I have finished college, dressed up as Spider-Man in public, and witnessed Cyberpunk 2077. To tell you that 15-year-old me was a fucking fraud. Everything about this game is just bad. The RPG elements don't work or make any sense in an 8-hour-long game like this. Hope County was butchered and fractured in a way that removes half of the original map and all of its best areas. And the story? What fucking story? You mean the tropey, soulless, cash grab shitfest that completely destroys the original's ambiguous epilogue? Completely ruining one of the best villains in the entire series? Far Cry New Dawn to this day is still one of my biggest gaming disappointments, and was the entry I began to question my love for this series. And deep down I thought, the next game couldn't be as bad as New Dawn. There's no fucking way they could fumble the bag this hard for the second time in a row. Well, let's just say it's complicated.
I was acting. Or was I?
Far Cry 6 is one of the strangest and most confusing games I've ever played. Its gameplay made all the right decisions and logical jumps that made so much sense. Danny as a protagonist was interesting and a great step in the right direction compared to the muted freaks of the past 2 games. And the main villain looked like a genuinely interesting and compelling antagonist with Giancarlo Esposito playing Anton Castillo. However, the thing that really let this game down and single-handedly killed my excitement in future projects as a fan was the one thing they seriously had to nail: the story. The campaign in Far Cry 6 is somehow even worse than New Dawn's. I don't even know how that's possible, because in this game there is nothing to latch onto. The villains in this game are the worst in the entire series, with Anton Castillo being nothing but surface level screen presence. Extremely entertaining and memorable performance, but none of the substance and intrigue that makes Far Cry villains so memorable. The campaign is really drawn out, the pacing is fucking awful, and the side villains are just there. Not to mention the fact that the missions themselves are extremely repetitive and forgettable. There's no new regions or areas besides a hilariously bad city with no explorable interiors, and countless other disappointments that just brings this mediocre game to a below average experience. Now, to be fair, there are a few innovations sprinkled throughout Far Cry 6, such as these awesome gimmick weapons that were so fun to use, or the Supremos. But it's not enough, man, and that ending just makes everything so much worse. Far Cry 6 is ultimately the downfall of this series because it reveals a very depressing reality fans simply don't want to accept. Because it's over. The Far Cry we once loved is dead and buried, the soul is gone, the villains are nothing beyond poor rehashes of beloved characters, and the games just suck now. The reason Far Cry lost its way is because it's trying to capture lightning in the same bottle over and over again, without ever moving location or changing the bottle. What made this series so iconic and memorable in the first place was the opportunity to dive into a world full of atmosphere and character. A world where you battled an antagonist who had a story to tell and explored themes most games don't dare touch. A world where you could truly be immersed in the fantastic OSTs and ambience of exploration in a map that felt special. Every game in this series did one of these things extremely well, and for many fans that was enough for them. But unfortunately for Ubisoft, the games they're developing are not only inferior and absurdly outdated when compared to previous entries, but they're also missing the charm that made so many of us fall in love with these games in the first place. The downfall of Far Cry is one of the most tragic and frustrating declines I've ever seen in my history of playing video games. It's a prime example of how a formula like this only works in the hands of talented and passionate people. There's only so many times you can throw as a quirky main villain before their presence feels generic and cliched. There's only so many times we can unlock and progress the same skill trees before we get bored and want to move on. There's only so many times you can sell us the same game over and over again before fans finally say no. And after Ubisoft's most recent disaster, it appears that might be the case. This series was my first big introduction to AAA gaming, and to see where it is now is depressing. However, to take a look on the bright side, I'm so thankful I got to experience the golden age of this excellent franchise. I will never forget me and my friends excited in English class waiting for the bell to ring so we could all rush home and play Far Cry 5. I'll never forget the time my dad gave me a copy of Far Cry Primal for my 13th birthday. And I'll never forget the time I first played Far Cry 3 and became a fan of this excellent phase of Ubisoft. If you're like me and you made it this far, I'd like you to go away with this. This series will never reach the peak it once did. There's no way they can surprise you, and the magic of playing the old games will never be found in these sequels. However, if you go back to the roots of this series and sit back with some snacks and maybe a few beers, not for my younger viewers, you might just capture that magic again and maybe it will be stronger than ever before. In other words, don't be sad because it's over. Be happy because it happened. Like and subscribe for more content in the future, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.